So is zero point 0.1 Bitcoin enough to retire? A lot of people, like our good friend British Hodl says, get to 1 Bitcoin. Some people say 0.1 Bitcoin's enough.
Last bull market, we saw Bitcoin go from 4,000 to about 70, right? Which is about 17.5x or what the current price was. That exact change here. And if you 17x that, Luke, you get to 1.2 million per coin. So we could see a drastic run up.
So this probably gets us into the second part of what I want to discuss, and that is so is 0.1 Bitcoin enough to retire? Everybody wants to know how much Bitcoin I need to retire and when I can retire on Bitcoin. So today I brought my man on the show to talk about some potential scenarios for where Bitcoin could be during this Bitcoin bull market. Brandon, welcome to the podcast.
Luke, thanks so much for having me, man. Yeah, I mean, hey, where is Bitcoin gonna go here? We've got a ton of things lining up. But last bull market, we saw Bitcoin go from 4,000 to about 70, right? Which is about 17.5x what the current price was. That exact change here. We're sitting at 70K here now. And if you 17x that, Luke, you get to 1.2 million per coin. So we could see a drastic run up. And I know everybody's like, well, 70K isn't the bottom. Well, I would argue that last cycle we had a ton of paper Bitcoin. We had Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX selling you paper Bitcoin. We had, Celsius and all these others, bad actors, selling you paper Bitcoin. Well, this time we don't have that kind of paper Bitcoin. We've got the ETFs. We have the amount of FOMO money sitting on the sidelines that we've never seen before. I think in the past week and a half alone, we've seen over $2 billion worth of buys just on the ETFs alone here, Luke. So with all this, man, I think this is prime for a big run up. We're about to see that Bitcoin gif of the Bitcoin riding up the roller coaster all the way up, man, because I think this thing is a bubble and it's about to pop and go straight up.
Yeah, I think that's actually a fair point, to be honest with you. And again, I agree, 70K is not the bottom, but Bitcoin has just consolidated for like 8 months now. It's one of the longer consolidation periods we've ever had. A lot of the data points, again, we don't look at a ton of data points or draw funny lines on charts on this YouTube channel, but if you do look at a lot of the metrics, like Bitcoin has reset a lot of these, fear and greed indices. Even if you look at like Google search trends, before this past run up this week, we were pretty like low on Google search terms for Bitcoin. We were incredibly low. We were at bear market lows in 2022. So I actually don't think that extrapolation is crazy where you're talking about, okay, hypothetically, again, just a thought experiment. If Bitcoin does 17x from here, could be worth $1.2 million a coin. And a lot of people just haven't really thought about that scenario. Most people think of $1 million Bitcoin. It's a long way away and it's never going to happen. So this probably gets us into the second part of what I want to discuss. And that is, how much Bitcoin do we need to retire? A lot of people, like our good friend British Hodl says, get to 1 Bitcoin. Some people say 0.1 Bitcoin's enough. I've made videos showing that 0.01 Bitcoin is enough. I'd love your thoughts on it, Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the personal situation here, but 17.5x, right? I mean, so if you really think about that, point one of that is 120,000. And if you can live on that for 4 years, there's the potential of that 17xing again down the line, 4 years down the road. I mean, I think at this point, the government is just addicted to the money printer. So there's no telling how much that will continue to go up. But I'm thinking, close to zero point 0.1 Bitcoin at this point, 10 million sats. That's looking pretty nice to retire off of maybe 4 years, 8 years down the road, Luke. I think, we're just looking at this hyperinflation scale and things are just about to get wild here, I think. So, I mean, with all that being said, the finite supply of Bitcoin, I think, is truly one of Satoshi's greatest inventions of all time. And no human has ever experienced anything as scarce as Bitcoin, except for time, right? So, I mean, if you've got 4 to 8 years, that point one, that 10 million sats, that's going to take you a far ways, especially if we get to where we both think we're going here, where it could be upwards of a million a coin.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And again, like let's really, beat this thing down a little bit. Zero point 0.1 Bitcoin is only $7,200 today. We both believe you can retire on that in the future. Now, I do want to talk a lot more about how much Bitcoin we need to retire. And I might even try to squeeze a prediction out of you at the end of today's podcast. But this week is a special week. And I brought you on specifically to get your thoughts on what I think is an attack going on from the West on Bitcoin right now. And I found some pretty interesting data points. So for those who aren't aware, I'm going to bring them up to speed. Okay. So Italy just pretty much doubled their capital gains taxes on Bitcoin this week. Denmark come out and they're trying to become the first country to introduce unrealized capital gains taxes on Bitcoin. Then we have the Fed and the ECB within 4 days of each other, both releasing over 30-page reports attacking Bitcoin. The Fed says we need to create a special tax or ban Bitcoin to allow the government to run permanent primary deficits. Direct quote from the Minneapolis Federal Reserve. And we have the ECB talking about the fact that Bitcoin is going to impoverish society. It's making the rich richer. This is what the ECB is saying, right? And I found it coincidental. All of those things happen on the same week that BRICS was having a meeting with their new members. And a lot of these BRICS countries, and even the new BRICS members, are really bullish on Bitcoin. Now, you talk a lot about this geopolitical war that's going on. You talk about the Fed and the West using this monetary arm of the war, and the BRICS countries doing something else. I want your thoughts on that whole big story I just painted and what the people should be paying attention to.
Yeah, 100%. So, the way I've been viewing this whole situation is that the West, the US, we have the monetary arm to pull, whereas the BRICS nations, they have this energy arm to pull. So, if you remember a couple years ago, Russia was, when they first invaded the Ukraine, there was all these talks about European countries having no gasoline, no oil, or anything like that. It was going to be a rough winter, was the narrative. Well, because of the US putting all these sanctions on Russian oil and everything like that, the sanctions didn't end up working, right? I mean, people were still getting the Russian oil. Like, it wasn't the worst European winter ever. But it showed cracks in the US power over everybody. That monetary arm that the US was pulling, keeping interest rates at a super high level, it's starting to piss everybody off around the globe. And so we've seen it. More countries have been applying to enter the BRICS. We've seen Turkey try to apply to get in. We've seen Saudi Arabia going for it as well. And other countries as well are looking more at these BRICS nations all coming together and using that energy arm that they're pulling here to become more of a world power. So it's been, in my opinion, for since this whole thing has started, that the US keeping the interest rates high is just going to piss everybody off. And at a certain point in time, everybody's going to get so pissed off they're going to move away from the dollar, especially with all this money printing here going on. Now, on the flip side of things, with this Bitcoin, everybody attacking Bitcoin, it's pretty interesting to see the timing of that, because not only is BRICS meeting, but the campaign in the US election here, Luke, is what? We're recording this on the 31st. The election's on Monday or Tuesday next week. So it's in 4 or 5 days here. And we've also had Trump come out and say, you should be able to buy coffee in Bitcoin. You shouldn't have any taxes on Bitcoin. If I was president, maybe we wouldn't have capital gains tax on Bitcoin. So he's floated that out there. And I think a lot of countries around the world, that are, extremely left leaning. A lot of the countries that you named already don't like Trump and would kind of go away from any policies that he would potentially say here. And so I think it's a combination of being pissed off at the US for pulling the monetary arm, keeping the interest rates at extremely high levels, and President Trump being pretty Bitcoin friendly. I think, like, once President Trump comes in, and if he's a Bitcoin friendly president, the US, I mean, that could be the way that we keep the power with the dollar here. We use the dollar, or we use Bitcoin as a strategic reserve. Bitcoin goes to the moon, and everybody else gets upset that the US dollar keeps on this reign here. So I know I just kind of spewed a lot here at you, Luke. So I'll let you have the floor back, and tell me what you think about all I was spewing.
I think it's all interesting stuff you're putting out there, my friend. I mean, very interesting rabbit holes. I do tend to agree that maybe the West is engaging in a little bit of an economic war. Like that's what you're referring to. You're saying that the reason the Fed has raised interest rates so aggressively is because it is fighting these BRICS countries. A lot of people might be thinking, hang on, how does that work? Okay. Again, we have to really think about things. When the Fed raises interest rates, that means people who own US debt are in trouble because it's harder to pay back that debt if the dollars are worth more. Okay. And this creates like this inflation spiral in countries like Argentina, Turkey, Asia, all of these countries that are saddled with US debt. All of a sudden, their debt becomes more expensive to pay. And that's no coincidence that since the Fed has embarked on the fastest interest rate hiking schedule in history, taking rates from 0 to 5.5 in a year, we've seen Argentina suffer from 252% inflation, where I am right now. We see Turkey blew up their currency. They saw about 80% inflation each year at the peak back in 2022. So I think that's what you're kind of saying, right, Brandon? Am I reading that right?
Yeah, 100%. Where, this monetary arm of just keeping the interest rates high is hurting every other currency around the globe here. So they're trying to grasp at straws and figure out ways to do it, and make their own currency a little bit stronger. So, what is that? What is the way to do that? Either teaming up with BRICS, raising taxes on something else, and Bitcoin seems to be the easy out at this point. So, I agree with you, and or I agree with how you laid it out there is, essentially what I'm seeing is just this monetary war, where, the US keeping the interest rates high is making it difficult for everybody else. And I think that's part of the reason we saw Elizabeth Warren calling for a 75 basis point cut earlier this year, right before we did that 50 basis point cut. And but either president, by the time they get in here, they're going to be calling for interest rates to go down to near zero. And yeah, man, then it's off to the races. So then we might start to see some serious inflation because I think, just overall, we haven't completely combated that here in the US just yet. And that's where we're going is to another low interest rate environment. And that's when everything's going to go bonkers here.
So you're telling me that inflation is not transitory and you expect another spike of inflation?
I think it's starting to reaccelerate. I mean, I think, Powell didn't want to necessarily lower interest rate. I think he got really pressured into it, to be honest with you. I imagine that, he was saying higher for longer, then all of a sudden, right before the election time, September time, end of this year, he decided to cut and not just cut 25 basis points and cut back a little bit. He cut 50 on the first one. And so I think he's going to start to cut again. And he's going to continue to do a fast cut as he did a fast raise. And so I think that's just a recipe for disaster at this point because, as high as, he went up super high, he broke basically a lot of the banks that weren't really prepared for it. Who knows what's going to break or fail or something on the way down. So I think, the Fed is an imperfect system where it's run by humans, it's run by backdating data. And at a certain point in time, this backdating data that they're manipulating, and we can get down that rabbit hole as well. This backdating data that they're using is, too slow to keep up with the current environment. And then cutting rates, you're probably going to do that a little bit too late as well. So, I think with all this being said, they raised too late, they raised too quickly, and they're going to cut too late and probably cut too quickly.
I think that's a great way to sum it up, actually. The Fed is always all central banks, not just the Fed, all central banks don't know what they're doing. That's why we've seen every fiat currency ever tried fail and blow up. There's been hundreds of them, and that's because central planners always succumb to human greed. If they can print money, they will print money. And the interest rate, schedule, the interest rate hiking and lowering schedule we're talking about just becomes more extreme the closer you get to collapse. I don't think it was a coincidence. We saw the fastest interest rate hiking schedule in 2022. Now, speaking of cycles, and a lot of people are saying, "Oh, the stock market's overvalued." I know you pay a lot more attention to macro land, and a lot of the analysts in macro land. Have we cancelled this recession, or is there still potentially a recession brewing?
Luke, we haven't gotten to a recession yet. If you ask all the traditional macro bros here, everything is fine. Everything is peaches and daisies in the economy, which is kind of interesting here, Luke, because there's one website that I really like to look at a lot, and I got it from my buddy CJK. So shout out to him, but it's Govflation. Now, it looks at some of the data like CPI and everything like that. But it looks at how we used to calculate the numbers before we really changed up a lot of the calculations. So one of those being CPI here. And I think that is like probably the most telling statistic that we can look at, comparatively when we're looking at inflation and how everything's going. Because in reality, all these statistics that the government is reporting is just extremely, extremely watered down and really just doesn't show the true picture. So, for example, if you look at the way that CPI was calculated in 1982 at the peak of everything, which the government did was here. Yeah, here we go. Here's a perfect thing. So scroll down there on CPI and you can see and look at some of the graphs here, which I think is incredible. So, yeah, look at that one. Here's perfect. So, look at the peak there in June 2022, which was not too long ago, which was the peak of 9.06. The real CPI that they calculated in 1982 would have been reported at 17.3% of a CPI inflation. So now they're trying to say that inflation is under wraps. We had an inflation print in July of 2.9, and that real GDP or that real CPI print is at 10.6%. So we're still getting all these calculations here, and they're just overinflating everything. They're just moving the bar farther and farther down. And if you go and really go down this rabbit hole on this website, you'll see that everything that even the government, was printing and even the government was reporting at a certain point in time shows that we're still in a recession and we're just not even close to out of it yet. But if you ask the traditional macro bros, they'll look at the way that things are being calculated now, and by the old definitions, a recession, they're just moving the bar. They're just moving the bar and kicking the can further and further down the road. You know as well as I know here, Luke, the more that we print money, the bigger these swings are going to be. So they're trying not to make that this seem to be as bad as it is. But in reality, Luke, I don't think the average person is really out and clear here. I think the average person is still hurting buying groceries. I think the average person is still not happy paying as much they are in gas. And I think we still got a long way ahead to kind of climb our way out of this. So I don't think that we're out of this recession. And I think whoever comes in at president, either one, they're going to want to lower interest rates in order to quote unquote get out of this recession. And I think that that's just going to make it worse.
Now, I wanted to quickly interrupt today's interview to give a massive shout out to our lead sponsor, Rhino Bitcoin. Rhino is a Bitcoin banking solution that combines traditional financial services with the power of Bitcoin. Created by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners, Rhino offers a range of different services. You can buy Bitcoin, you can sell Bitcoin, you can withdraw straight to cold storage, and you can even pay other people using the Bitcoin Lightning Network. You can also purchase gift cards with sats at the click of a button, and you can even connect a multi-signature setup to Casa, all by using the Rhino application. Additionally, you can even send cash globally to your family and friends using Rhino, and soon you'll be able to pay bills, borrow money against your Bitcoin, and even save Bitcoin for your retirement, all in the one seamless application. You guys can visit rhinobitcoin.com to download Rhino today and experience the future of Bitcoin banking. Yeah, well, that's the kicker. That's what a lot of people don't understand. Neither Kamala or Orange Man are talking about balancing the budget. They're both going to print money. They both have an enormous debt spiral they're trying to deal with. And it's not a coincidence that neither of them, in this entire political campaign, are actually talking about balancing the budget. I think it's interesting that Trump is at least talking about creating this Bitcoin strategic reserve. And we're going to pay back the debt by giving everybody a little bit of crypto. I think that's what he said. What do you think about that potential? Could we see a an American Bitcoin strategic reserve? And if so, what does that create amongst the other Western countries? Do we see FOMO, or will countries start printing their local currency to buy Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I mean, if you really think about it, the US is basically the only country that could print money to buy Bitcoin, right? Because we have the global reserve currency, so they could print money to buy Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin price would shoot up so quickly relative to their currency, whatever it is. I mean, I'm following a few Canadians, and if you ask a Canadian what the Bitcoin price is, it's over 100K already because in Canadian dollars. So but everybody's just kind of tracking it based on the US dollar. The way that Trump has worded it, and I think, back to your question, Luke, about the strategic reserve, yes, that can happen, and that would only happen if President Trump gets into office. Now, would we actually buy more Bitcoin? Because if you listen closely at the Nashville conference, he essentially just said that he doesn't want to sell any of the seized Bitcoin, which I think is a smart plan, something to start with. But he told us that RFK is also going to be a part of his cabinet, something or other. He's going to be involved. I don't know how, at what point or what extent, but Robert F. Kennedy was talking about buying a Bitcoin a day. So, and kind of going through it that way. So I think, he's got the right people in his ear. Trump does, and I think that what this would do is you see the classic meme on Bitcoin Twitter of the rise and the falls of the empires. You see it showing the Bitcoin rise and the US slightly falling down. Now, what I think this would do, it would be basically delaying the inevitable, which Bitcoin is inevitable, of Bitcoin becoming the global reserve currency. It would give more strength back to the dollar because we would have something kind of backing it. Maybe we could get to a Bitcoin backed dollar, but as we know, Luke, we're human, right? So somebody's going to go in there and mess it up here down the road, and the inevitable is going to happen where the US dollar is going to crash and Bitcoin becomes the global reserve currency. But in the meantime, this will give everybody in the Bitcoin space time to, build up everything, the infrastructure, the Lightning Network, and everything like that. And it will give other countries and other companies, all these other people start to see the success of MicroStrategy, the success of the United States for building this strategic reserve. And I mean, I think some are even already looking at El Salvador, what they're doing and seeing the success there and starting this to copycat that. So I definitely think that if the US elects President Trump and he continues the strategic reserve, whether he just holds the seized assets or buys more Bitcoin, I think we're going to see more and more countries start to come in, and strictly because they're going to have to do it in order to keep up. It's not going to be more of a want thing, it's going to be more of a need thing. So the FOMO on a need is a lot more of a FOMO on a want. So I think the FOMO dollars that we'll see coming in will be astronomical and something that we've truly never seen before.
Bullish. I think that's really bullish, bro. You're getting me going here at 11 o'clock, 11:05 on an Argentinian Thursday here. Brandon, you are talking about these countries who need it. They need the Bitcoin out of necessity. One of those is El Salvador. And I just thought of El Salvador because you're going to be coming down and talking about adopting Bitcoin with myself. And it got me thinking, hang on a minute. This chap's probably traveled to more Bitcoin conferences than me. I want to ask you, Brandon, what's it like traveling on the road, speaking to Bitcoin conferences, and going to all of these different countries like Madeira, where we first initially met, and El Salvador? What are some of the biggest lessons or takeaways you found from not only just interacting with the Bitcoiners at these Bitcoin conferences, but like you've been at El Salvador? What do you think of it, and how is the Bitcoin standard going?
Yeah, it's awesome. It's absolutely awesome to go to around the globe and see all these different Bitcoiners. But the one thing that really stands out from all of it is once you meet a Bitcoiner, it's like you've known them your whole life. You have a lot of the similar mindsets, you have a lot of the similar core beliefs. So it's not really starting at ground zero there. So I mean, traveling to all these places, I always feel extremely welcomed. No matter where I'm going, I always find some Bitcoiners always offering a helping hand, always offering, hey, can I show you around, everything like that. So it's been outstanding. And as you know, you traveling around a bunch here, Luke, and meeting other Bitcoiners all over the place, they're always willing to show you the local spots and kind of, uncover some cool gems for you. So I think with all that, I mean, it's been truly a blessing to go around the globe and speak at a lot of these Bitcoin conferences. I'm excited to go to El Salvador and see you there again, there, Luke. And yeah, man. I mean, if you really think about it, like how long have we really known each other, started talking? Maybe a year or so, and I feel like you're one of my better friends here, Luke, because we just we just clicked and connected here so well. So I think I've got a lot of great Bitcoin friends, and seeing them all over the world, it's crazy. Yeah, it makes me time just absolutely flies by, and I absolutely love it. So for those who haven't gone out to a Bitcoin conference, I highly recommend it because you're going to make some Bitcoin friends, and Bitcoin friends turn into best friends, and then yeah, you never know what all you guys can accomplish from there.
Couldn't agree more, dude. I've only known you for about 48 hours in person, but the feeling is absolutely mutual. It's a beautiful thing about meeting Bitcoiners in person. Now, I want to squeeze a Bitcoin price prediction out of you in a moment here to wrap things up because I want to knock some socks off the people listening. But first, while we're talking about conferences, you've always got camera in hand. You do have a pretty rapidly growing YouTube channel talking about Bitcoin content. You've interviewed some really interesting people like NFL quarterbacks and kickers and a lot of people that you might not see on your typical Bitcoin podcasts and YouTube channels. So I wanted to quickly ask you about that. How's Green Candle going, and what's the mission there?
Yeah, Green Candle is great. So I like to describe it as the bar stool of finance and Bitcoin, man. I like to bring in everybody who's talking about Bitcoin. I think there's definitely areas of, athletes who are finding out about Bitcoin, kind of spreading their message out there, and they just, nobody's really asking them about it, right? And I think, there's also, great guests I've had on like Jack Mallers, who I've been lucky to meet in Madeira and talk with him as well. So I like to sit there and have fun with it, give the guests maybe a little hard time and some funny questions there at the end, and yeah, man, interview some athletes and maybe some of the not so typical Bitcoin podcast guests to get them on there and have them share their thoughts because I think at the end of the day, everybody's a Bitcoiner, they just haven't figured it out yet. So we're gonna get to that point where everybody's starting to figure it out and. Why don't we bring in everybody onto the party, man? It's just going to be one big orange party here.
Couldn't agree more, dude. Now, speaking of funny questions, you mentioned it. I want to try to put you on the spot a little bit. I want a 2025 Bitcoin price prediction at the top, and I want a 2030 Bitcoin price prediction from you. Again, we know that price predictions are just price predictions. Nobody knows where the price of Bitcoin is going, but I'd love to just know where you think we could be in a hypothetical world.
Okay, well, I mean, I already put it out there. The 1.2 million, I think, for 2025, maybe late 25, early 26 is when we would get to that point. I still think we're going to get to above 100K before the end of the year here, Luke. I've got that bet with Julian, Kinetic Finance, that I'd have to eat two Carolina Reapers if it doesn't. I think we're on the way up, dude. As we know, November. Average return in the month of November is over 40% in Bitcoin's history. So if that happens here, we'll easily see 100K before the end of November. But I'm just hoping before the end of the year here. So I think 100K before the end of the year. I think, we get the 1.2 a million about the end of 25. But then, all right, what's 17 and a half times that, Luke? Some quick math. It looks like, oh, would you look at that? It would be 21 million by the year 2030. So
Wow.
if we keep going down this rabbit hole, or if we keep going down this cycle where Bitcoin keeps or where they keep printing money and keep opening up all this liquidity and it just gets dumped into the scarcest asset on the planet, I don't know, Luke. We could see some crazy numbers like 21 million per Bitcoin here, in our lifetime, which would be absolutely crazy to see.
It really would be crazy to see. Now, that would imply that the power law would break. Brandon, I want your thoughts. Are you a power law believer?
No, man, I think that Bitcoin is the only thing that's truly scarce that we've ever really seen on this planet. Everything else can create more. So that's why I think the power law is it's an interesting thought experiment, but as Preston usually says, all models are useful, or all models are wrong, but some are useful. So I think it's been useful for a short period of time here, but I think once we get all this money dumping in, whether it's countries, whether it's traditional finance, that top's going to be blown off, and the roof is off, and the party's jumping here.
I tend to agree, dude. I think the party will be jumping, that's for sure. And I do think, Bitcoin is such a complex system to believe that you can model it and predict what it's going to do in the future using the first 15 years of data when 0.1% of the world has adopted Bitcoin and extrapolating that out. It's not how technologies get adopted. But maybe we'll save that conversation for another day, my friend. Where can the people reach out to you and find you online?
Yeah, 100%. So thanks so much for having me. Everybody smash the like and subscribe button for my buddy Luke here. But you can find me, search Green Candle on YouTube, Green Candle wherever you get podcasts, or Green Candle IT. Somebody has a Green Candle handle on X and Instagram and TikTok. So somebody tell them to hand it over to me. But yeah, you can find me at all those places chatting and creating some cool content.
Some of the best content in the space, if I do say so myself, Brandon. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you to everyone who